My name is Miguel Mata, first generation American, retired military veteran, and now full-time college student. In my lifetime, I've come to meet people from all walks of life, from every corner of the country and most parts of the world, and what I can tell you is, everyone has a story. On my channel, I plan to share those stories with all of you and prove that despite the differences that make each of us who we are as individuals, fundamentally, we are all the same. And I believe that through the common thread of overcoming challenges, caring for our loved ones, and helping our communities, the rest of us will realize that our world is actually much brighter than some would make us think. And now, to shed more light. This Way Out. Hello, welcome back to another episode of This Way Out. And today I am speaking with
Jessica Wilkes.
Jessica Wilkes. Jessica is another person that I know in my, as I study here at the College of Charleston, and yet another person with another very, I think, interesting story. Falls into my philosophy that everybody has a story. It's just a matter of talking to people. So we were here talking about getting set up. Well, we were here getting set up for the interview, and I'll be honest with you, I wasn't real sure like the direction that we were going to go with this, but I think I learned something very interesting about you that folks here would be interested in as well. To get things started though, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what do you do, that sort of stuff?
My name is Jessica Wilkes. I am the Director of Veteran and Military Student Services at the College of Charleston. I'm an Air Force veteran. I was 12 years active duty as combat camera, and I grew up in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale. Another
combat camera vet. I spoke to Jessica Hugie in one of my earlier episodes, and she was also combat camera. And I think the two of you, I don't know, did you guys get together? I know you're working on...
We haven't had the chance yet, but I told her, we need to sit down and talk, because I'm sure we could have a lot of the same experiences.
Yeah. Your experience in combat camera has played a big part in who you are today, and what I find interesting is the kind of the layer that it's added to your personal story. You grew up a kid with divorced parents, and as a result of that divorce, you grew up with who exactly?
My dad.
And he was a big part of your life?
Yes.
How would you describe your relationship with your dad growing up?
My dad was really young when he had me, so we kind of grew up together. He was a large child. Up until, I've always been a daddy's girl, up until the day he passed away. I mean, we were always very close. Even as he got older and he started asking me what I thought, I'm like, you want to know what I think? Really?
You said that, you mentioned something when we were talking about he was a creative person. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that any?
I can give you an example. So we lived in this apartment, not so great area, and we didn't have much. So we'd gotten donations from a church that we were part of, and part of it was these 1970s curtains that were brown and you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
The kinds that had the hooks that you had to actually put on the weird rod. So he took those and a bed sheet that was brown, I don't know why he had a brown bed sheet, and cut it up and made little bows to make it girly for my room.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was my dad. He found a way to make it work, and that, to me, that creative mind, I mean, I have a Christmas tree of his at home that he made, and it's detailed. He put like little pine cones in there, and like that was just, he was incredible at that stuff. And even flower arrangements. He had this, I think I'd come home on leave, and he had this get together for our family with the snacks and all that, and then he had this floating tropical flowers with floating candles. I'm like, this is something I would never think to do. I would just order it because I don't think that way.
Right. That's pretty interesting. That's really fascinating, actually. So your dad, it sounds like your dad was a pretty awesome guy.
He was.
It's a pretty safe bet to say that your dad made an impression on you. He, in his creativity, I'm sure, and in other ways, he made a pretty big impression on you.
I can remember looking at him as a little kid in the grocery store one day, totally embarrassed him. But I looked up at him, and like, I think everybody around him, years later, he said, you know, the way I reacted wasn't right. I looked up at him and I was like, my big muscle dad. My dad was a skinny man.
Yeah.
I was like, my big muscle daddy, and I gave him a big hug. And he was so embarrassed because everybody in the line turned to look at him. And years later, he said, you know, I shouldn't have reacted that way because they were looking at you like, how sweet is that? How much she loves her dad. And I'm like, hey, I told them that up until the day he passed away, that he was always my hero. I wanted, he moved out on his own at 15.
Right.
And his mother died when he was really young.
Right.
Happened to have a father who was a Marine Raider who had PTSD.
Right.
But, you know, that stuff wasn't treated back then.
You know, so I'm gonna keep this going just because you know, I try. Yeah, I don't want to miss anything, and also that I don't. There's this. I'm trying to do like a big reveal as to what I was thinking, the layer that I was trying to expose, but there's something about your dad that made an impression on you that you wanted to be a good parent yourself.
Right.
Right. You wanted to because you know you have your own kids, right?
One.
Right. You have your own child, and you go out of your way to be there for her in every way possible.
You know, my dad worked, and he didn't have that luxury to ever leave work to come see my play or the spelling bee or all the things that I did as a kid. I don't know, I must have felt awful, but I do. And he was an awesome parent. That was just the one thing he couldn't do. So I make that effort now that I want to be there for all of it. I mean, and I've gone to some questionable events for my daughter.
Yeah.
But I go to all of them.
Right.
Because I know what it's like to look out there and not see anyone there to watch you.
Right. Your military career did not make that easy for you, though. The time that you were active duty.
The first time I deployed, my daughter was 18 months old. When I got home, she didn't know who I was. Didn't want anything to do with me. And the second time I got back was a little bit better, but still kind of, I missed out on everything.
Right.
And, you know, when I came back from my first one, I was dealing with anxiety, what they called post-deployment, something like that. It was like I was having a heart adjustment disorder.
You're having an adjustment disorder.
Yeah, and the reason that they diagnosed me as that was, well, you haven't been home long enough to have PTSD. I'm like, okay, fine. Which was a big mistake because 3 years later I thought I was still dealing with the same thing, but I wasn't. And it made me numb.
Right.
And detached from everything.
Right.
And the things that I wish I'd been there for, with her school and just the little things that would have mattered to her when she was really young, I couldn't.
Right.
I just wasn't, and I wasn't until 3 years later when it was unmanageable and I didn't have control over my emotions and how I reacted to things that I did some reading and saw, wow, okay, so not being able to keep things straight in your head, being loving people around you but not feeling it, like
emotionally detached.
From everything.
Right.
And being that way with her was the part where I was like, this is a huge problem.
Okay, so you said that happened you felt that happened after your first deployment.
It was over time.
Right.
And I don't think it really hit me until after I got back from my second deployment.
Right.
When it really, because it was like a switch flipped when I boots hit the ground
Right.
in Iraq on my second tour, which was like 13 months later. I was immediately angry.
So, can you explain? I don't know if you're comfortable answering this question. Okay, PTSD is typically something that gets thrown around with, or gets associated with people who are involved in combat. And as someone, just on the surface, somebody who just tuned into this thing and learned that you were a combat camera, maybe they don't understand just exactly what you were exposed to while you were deployed. Do you feel comfortable sharing some of that stuff? Like, what do you think are some of the experiences, or maybe you can just share one experience, because I don't want to get you, I don't want to trigger you or anything like that, but what experiences can you share that maybe led to some of the trauma that you even deal with today?
Well, I can remember one of the worst days I ever had, and this will probably haunt me till the day that my time on this planet is done.
And once again, I say, if you don't feel comfortable talking about it. Okay.
I mean, I write about it, I talk about it. A lot of it still hasn't processed through yet, so there's still... I'll probably have nightmares tonight, but that's okay. I have them every night anyway.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. But it was closer towards, like, I would say 75% of the way through my tour. So I'd already been there for most of it. And we were going into a town called Turir, which I've never had a good experience there. I was like, oh boy, okay, great. We were going in with a MIT team, military transition team, who was training the Iraqi army to take over security of their own country once we all pulled out. In this mission, they had a couple of high-value targets that we were supposed to get, and we went in there, and it was like from the second we were hiding behind a power plant, trying to... Basically, the only way we can get in was to run across this big muddy field. It just happened to be the raining season. So I'm nervous already because I know that physically I have limits, and I wanted to not be slow. I spent a lot of time pretending that I was tougher and stronger than I really am. And there was no way I was gonna, I knew if I screwed up on this mission, I wasn't going to come back home. So they're shooting out at us, the bad guys, and we're trying to work our way in. We got behind one of their armored vehicles, and all right, we're going to make a mad dash right there to safety. So everybody takes off. I take off, and I'm proud because I am kicking ass. I am passing people. Like, all right, I'm doing pretty good. But what I didn't think about was that like 30 pounds, 43 pounds of extra gear that I had on. I could feel my center of gravity move, and I'm like, oh no. I could feel my legs like, oh. And I just went down. And at the time it was really cold, like 30 degrees, 40 degrees. So I didn't have much feeling in my feet because outside long enough. Everything from the shin down was numb. So when I fell, it was like that much harder. And when I fell, I went flat down, and I can still hear gunfire. And I'm watching everybody run past me. No one's stopping, which I wouldn't have wanted anyway, but at the same time I did. And I remember trying to lift up my head and thinking, oh my God, this is real. Like, this isn't an exercise. I could really die here. And then I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to be able to get back up with all this weight. Right. And the fact that I can't feel my feet. And then I looked down and I looked back up, and I had this specialist photographer that was with me. I'm glad that he was a little bit older, ran a little slower. He came up, and I saw this hand. I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much for stopping. Because I don't know if I ever would have been able to get back up. And that scared me, because that was a situation where I couldn't take care of myself. I had to have someone help me back up.
Right.
But
that was out of your control, because you were...
Well, everything is out of your control.
You're small of stature or whatever. Like, you weighed X amount and you had X amount of weight on top of you. It's just a matter of, physics or whatever.
Well, to me it was a matter of weakness, because there's a lot of things that are out of my control. You know, whether or not I hit an IED and blow up and die, or all of that stuff was out of my control. But that was supposed to be something I could control.
Right.
And I couldn't.
Right.
And we get in there to that mission, and luckily the captain that was in charge of our little group was like, "What took you so long?" "Oh, I fell." "You fell?" And I was like trying to weigh my options. Should I tell him? Or have him think that I'm super lazy and I run slow? So, I mean, and he kind of smirked at me, and we went about our mission. And we didn't make it very far before friendly fire was coming at us. And we got pinned up against this wall. But before that, you know, we're all wandering around in this courtyard, and I could hear the single gunshot. I could hear it pass me. And I thought, oh, that's got to be a sniper, because they only shoot one shot. You're not going to hear 50 shots. And that was another moment where I was really upset with myself, because that's common sense not to stand anywhere in the open. Another situation that day that I put myself in.
Right.
And then say that mission wasn't really a success because the Iraqi army gave up. We're cold, we're tired, we want to go back. Like, okay, so I guess we're going to let that guy go that just shot at us. But what affected me the most was that captain. Because 2 weeks after I got home, I got a phone call from my partner that was still in Iraq, that he'd been killed on the same mission that the girl that replaced me was shot. So to me, like, I think about all those stupid things that I did that could have gotten me killed, and it didn't. But this guy, who was badass, who was strong, who was trained and knew what he was doing, now has a wife and 2 kids that don't have, you know, they don't have a dad, they don't have a husband anymore.
Yeah.
And he knew what he was doing. I'm like, I will always struggle and feel guilty when I think about him, because I'm here and I really don't deserve to be.
Yeah.
I think that he should have been the one to go home. I haven't gotten emotional about this, and it's okay, but every year I think about him when the time comes, and I'm like, that will go with me for the rest of my life. And I think that's why I try so hard with my daughter, because I always thought when I was there that the thought of her growing up without me was the one, at the time, only reason that I was like, I have to go home. Not that I wanted to die there, but she was my motivation to not do stupid things, to not take risks that I didn't have to. But yeah, him dying was like, I mean, the only way I can compare to surviving all of that was because I didn't go to the same place every day. I didn't work with the same units every day. Had I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now.
Yeah.
I don't know that I even deserve to be sitting here right now. I'm grateful, but
I'm grateful, and I tell you what, I know it's a lot easier said than done, and I know with someone who deals with the kind of issues that you deal with right now, it may not seem appropriate, or it may not even hit the mark, but to say that someone does or does not deserve something, that adds a complexity to something that it's a, you know, I just think it adds a level of complexity that it's like an unanswerable question, you know? And I if that's the kind of stuff that you deal with on a regular basis, my heart goes out to you, because I know that I cannot fathom what it must be like to live that way. And, you know, and I'll probably cut this out in a minute later, but I just, you know, if you ever need to vent, and I know you guys, and I say you guys, I'm talking about the people that deal with the trauma that comes about after being involved in that sort of stuff. In those experiences, you hear it all the time. You get, if you need somebody to talk to, if you know, that sort of stuff. But I hope you believe me when I say that I genuinely mean that if you have to just get anything off your chest, or say anything or do anything or whatever, just send me a message, give me a call. We'll talk about it. And do you see a therapist now?
I did. A lot of the stuff that I just talked about was stuff that was addressed. I did. I think I did one session of prolonged exposure, and that was like, if you want to get better but not function for a while, that's the way to go. Because for me, I wasn't sleeping. I was like anxious all the time. So that lasted for one session. And then I did cognitive processing, which is when I started to write.
Right.
And I wrote down everything I could think of, probably way more than she needed me to.
Right.
But I wrote it all out, and then I read it to her. And while I was reading it to her, she was typing things that she took from what I was reading to her, and creating stuck points, things that I need to, what do they call it, debunk, like, the fact that I didn't feel like I deserved to come home.
Right.
That's something that we talked about. The fact that I felt like I should have done a better job with just being a soldier. And she's like, but you're not. Mm-hmm. That's not your job. Your job is, I'm like, yeah, but when you're out there, everything is your job. But she kind of reeled me back in and said, you're holding yourself responsible for things that aren't your responsibility. But to me, when you're in that situation, everything is your responsibility.
Yeah.
And I worried constantly, because of my size, that if someone went down and I was the only one that could grab them, what the hell am I going to do? Right. Which is maybe why I have the opinion I do on women in combat. I think it's not for everyone. If it were me, and I wouldn't have done it, because I know my limitations are physically. I mean, I could handle it mentally, but I wouldn't be able to do it physically, and I'd do it again. Right. But
Isn't that funny?
I think I would be a little smarter.
It's not funny, but it's. I always find that interesting about. I don't.
The worst experience of my life. I'll do it again.
I wasn't in combat myself, but there's just this. There's this. I call it an addiction. There's just this. There's a addiction. There's this.
It's purpose.
I loved being out there. I did. I mean,
it's purpose and its mission.
It had its. I mean, her blog is called "Embrace the Suck."
Embracing the suck.
Yeah, embracing the suck. And I tell you what, I ate it up.
And that's true about what it is, though, because when you're you could be in the worst situation ever. Like, we were sitting out in the middle of the desert, waiting for our Blackhawks to pick us up after an air assault, and I'm hungry and I'm tired and I'm just done. But everybody there is just as miserable. And I don't want to say it's fun, but it's better.
There's a connection.
When everyone around you is in the suck too.
Right. Everybody is. It's like you make these connections with these people, and that connection is just so strong. That bond, those bonds that you create, are so strong. It's like you just want to get back to that stuff.
Well, and it's kind of like when you have a baby. Your wife could probably.
Attest to that, maybe.
Right. So you think about it when you're going through it, and you're like, oh, God, that was so miserable. That hurt so bad. It was awful. And then now you're like, oh, it was a great time.
Yeah.
But really, you're like, if you'd gone back to yourself that day, you'd have been like, I'm not doing this again. Yeah. The same thing with that. I mean, I'm like, if I was younger and I had that opportunity to do it all over again, I would, but I would just make sure I was trained better. Because when I went the first time, I had a couple weeks, thank God, this captain created a very short combat airman course, which ended up, ironically, I was the one that was in combat. Mm-hmm. I got a lot out of it, and if it wasn't for that, I would have known nothing. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have even been comfortable carrying a weapon, because I literally only touched one the few times that I had qualified. Mm-hmm. So I would have gone not even knowing how to properly care for my weapon. Right. But by the time that I got done with that course, thankfully, I was much more comfortable.
Hey, there's your W, right? There's your W. You got to count your W's. You got to count your wins.
But and I mean, when I think about it now, I'm like, a lot of it is common sense stuff. But when you're, the first situation I can remember going, what the, was we had a it was not good. It was like a massive, like, it was an execution style thing that happened, and there were some folks that were just injured, some IA guys, and one of them comes running up to me, and he's pointing to his butt, and I look, and there's a bullet hole, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do for this guy. So I'm looking around, and I'm like, what? Where's the medic? And they're like, oh, over there. And I'm like, all right. But to me, I'm like, that's common sense stuff. I should know that. But for a minute, I'm just looking at this guy's bullet hole in his butt going, I don't know what you want me to do about that. But it ended up, I guess I think it was being with people, too, that were so sure and so experienced that it was almost like, it was a little intimidating.
Right.
And in the line of work that, particularly being a tiny female, of a totally cushy branch, as they think all the time, that I didn't want to look like didn't know what was going on or what I was doing. I mean, I didn't talk a whole lot, which probably helped me kind of give the facade that I wasn't, completely inexperienced, but yeah.
I'm going to take this moment right now to transition into another part of your life, which is your homecoming. I'm talking about the one that, because you were married during your deployments and whatnot. In your career, but it created a strain in your marriage. Can you talk about that any?
No, yeah, I can. I'm just thinking. Coming home, I remember distinctly a conversation when he was starting to mention vacation plans for when I got home. And at that time, I mean, I think it was the first day we weren't in calm blackout when someone died. So I think it was a few days after I'd almost been shot the first time. So him hounding me for these, wanting to make plans, I couldn't do it. I said, and forgive my language, but
that's okay.
I said, I don't even know if I'm gonna fucking make it home. I'm like, I almost got shot in the head, however long ago it was, and I'm like, and he goes, well, I don't want to hear about that. I don't want to know that you almost got shot. So to me, it was almost like I had to say it.
Right.
I didn't make a habit. That was the only time I ever said anything to anyone about it. But I wanted him to understand that that was not a priority. I wanted to come home, but I was not worried about making plans ahead of time. To me, it was like a bad omen. I don't want to make plans. Just let me it's almost like living the life of an alcoholic, one day at a time. Each day that you make it, you're a little bit closer to, and I think that's also like the beauty of being in that situation, is you really only have to worry about yourself. Right. And just sometimes for me, it was minute to minute. Right. If I survive this minute, we'll see what happens the next.
But he was obviously on a different page than you were.
Right. And I couldn't expect him to understand. I mean, that would be unfair of me. But when I got home, I just remember coming back from R&R and being at work the first day, and no one talked to me. And I don't think I picked up on it right away. And later on, everybody kept asking me if I was okay, and I'm like, fine, why? I don't know if I had the 1,000-yard stare when I walked in, but it took a while for people to be like, we didn't know if you were okay. I'm like, oh,
you had changed. They had noticed it.
I didn't have anything to say anymore.
But you didn't, right? And you had...
what was I gonna... But and I was coming back, to a unit where... And they were great, but it was not a unit where anybody had seen combat. Right. Maybe one or two people, but they didn't talk about it. Right. So coming back, when I got my first post-deployment health assessment, I was honest. I was like, I have to be honest because I'm not feeling okay right now. And I went in, and unfortunately, I think they've gotten so much better over the years, but at that time, it was a captain that I went to see, which I think is I don't think that's the appropriate way to treat someone with PTSD when you're still supposed to have that formal rank situation between the two of you. Because for me, like, he got upset with me when I got irritated with him and kind of brought up rank, and I'm like, this isn't gonna work, because I'm here to, like, be honest with you, but at the same time I have to call you sir and worry about offending you.
Yeah.
So, but I think he tried, but he was minimizing so much of what I'd been through, saying, well, it can't be PTSD yet, because I was like, okay, so it turned into PTSD because all those years I just kind of let it go.
Yeah.
And I'd hoped that it would help with my marriage, and I wanted to do something to get better, but I just wasn't the same person.
Yeah.
And the way that I described it to my therapist at the time was, it's like I died there, and then some of me came home. And I think even now, I mean, I got home from my first deployment in 2007. You're talking 12 years ago, and I'm not here all the way.
Yeah.
There will always be a big piece of my heart
Yeah.
that and part of me that will always be there, because who I am completely changed while I was
Right.
there, and I don't
Understood,
think
yeah.
it was all bad. I think I learned a lot about being grateful,
Right.
sympathy for others, and it's grown over time. I see the world very differently now, and I think you probably understand as well. When you go to places that are not so great and people are suffering, it makes you think almost. I think I wrote a blog post about this years ago when I started my first blog. We call it taking the blinders off, because when you're here, and I don't fault folks that haven't experienced that kind of stuff, but it's tunnel vision.
Right.
First world problems is what we
Right.
call
First
it.
world problems. Yeah.
And then you see some of the real problems in the world, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to worry about these little tiny things anymore. I'm grateful for that. But I'm also, in the back of my mind, working where I work with a community of traditional students on campus. I also think I'm grateful that they're able to live their life without thinking about all those things, because that's why we do what we do.
That's why I do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is what I try to explain to some of the folks here, is you can't be mad at them, because we gave them that opportunity to not have to worry about all the awful things.
People are entitled. The way I see it is that people are entitled to say or do a lot of things. Let me say it this way. I don't fault people for what they say or what they do unless it hinders on another person's life, liberty, or pursuit of happiness. Those three words took on a totally different meaning for me after my time in the military. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If someone's words or actions do not prevent another person from doing those three things, then whatever, to hell with it.
A lot of it's trying to understand other people, though.
Yeah.
Like, I like to think that when we're in the military, we're, in most senses, we're like-minded, because let's get the mission done, we know what we need to do. We don't have time for these conversations that
trivial
last week.
conversations,
So we're direct to the point. All right, let's get this done.
Yeah.
And
what's
then,
that got to do with this?
Exactly.
I don't understand. Yeah.
Right. You know, the way that we speak to other people is it's direct.
Yeah.
And it's not always received well. And this is liberal arts college, so I think it tends to be a little bit more subdued, maybe. A little bit kinder in the way, and that doesn't always happen with us.
Your marriage, unfortunately, didn't hold up. But your relationship with your daughter improved. It's better.
Oh yeah. The reason I got out, and it killed me, because I loved what I did, and I planned to do 20, but came down to the time where I had to move away and not take her, or stay and get out. And to me, it was a no-brainer. Like, all right, then I'll get out. Because the thought of being away and not being there and being present I wasn't going to let it happen anymore.
To tie it back into what you talked about earlier, is your desire to have a good relationship with your daughter started with your relationship with your dad.
Yeah.
Your dad and the contributions that he made and the impression that he made on you as a kid, it stuck with you even after all the garbage,
Yeah.
even after all the trauma. You still.
He was my example for
Right.
everything. I mean, my daughter's a lot like I was growing up, where there was no need for any sort of spankings or those type of punishments, because I can talk to her and she gets it. There's no misbehavior on that part. Like, she's very tuned into how I feel, and if I'm upset, she fixes it.
Right.
It was the same way with my dad. My dad didn't have to do any of those things because I loved him and respected him so much. I didn't want to upset him or
Right.
disappoint him. So it was same relationship as
Right.
I did with my dad, and my dad was very silly,
Right.
just cutting up all the time.
Right.
So it's kind of the same with my daughter and I.
Right.
Very silly. Like, if you want to be ridiculous, do it with mom.
Right. So my connection was the relationship with your dad, right, and the impression that he made on you, essentially is what brought you back to the real world, because it's a little bit of a stretch.
Made me recognize
Right.
that there was something wrong.
What you were experiencing interfered with your relationship with your daughter.
I didn't feel anything.
Right.
So when I noticed it one day, where I've always, like, I could just look at her and just fall in love with her all over again.
Right.
And one night I was thinking about it, and I'm like, I love her. I know I love her, but I don't, like, it felt like the head and the heart were disconnected.
Right.
And that's when I was like, this isn't good. And I noticed immediately after getting help and eventually reconsidering and going on medication that I got all of that back.
Yeah.
So now, it's great to feel love, because all I felt before was like sad and angry.
Right.
And because of her, I like to think that's why I'm doing as well as I am today.
Right.
I spent a lot of time in a bad place, and I just think, what would I have done if my dad had been like that?
Yeah.
How would we have weathered that?
Yeah.
And I inspired me to be to take care of myself better and
Yeah.
at least be good for her.
Yeah.
And then eventually it catches on and you just like feeling better, but it was
Well, I tell you what, I think I didn't mean to cut you off there. I just had a thought, and it's a really bad habit of mine to just cut right into the person's sentence, and I really do apologize. But now that we've caught the break, then I'm gonna go ahead and say it. It sounds like your dad did a good job with you, and if that's the example that you're trying to follow, then I think you're gonna be all right. I think your little one's gonna be all right too. So that's something that you can hold on to,
I think about
I think
that.
if you keep doing what you're doing, which it seems like you're in a good place now. I know you said that, you're falling into this job was kind of a godsend, but
Yeah.
I'd really like to go into that too if we could, but we're kind of running out of time now. So
We have 23 minutes.
okay. Tell us about how you fell into this job here, how you got this job.
You want me to go back to getting fired?
No. Or just because you told me, in not so many words, that you felt like it was luck, almost miraculous that you fell into this position. Why do you feel that way?
Well, I think it needs to start when I got my first job here. I lost my job right before I graduated from college, and I spent 15 months looking for one. Lowest point in my entire life. And on a whim, I saw an office manager job at the College of Charleston. I'm like, well, it couldn't hurt. I haven't had any luck anywhere else. And my issue was always the anxiety in the interviews that were an issue. So I got called for an interview, and then I got called for another interview up in advising. But I met the gentleman that was the director of the Roar Scholars Program, which is for students with disabilities, first generation and low income students. And it was an awesome program. Unfortunately, the grant wasn't renewed. So 5 months after starting, I needed another job. So I'm panicking like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, I can't do unemployment again.
Right. You just and you said it was 15 months?
15 months.
Right. Okay. So 15 months you fall into this job. Now it looks like you're about to go back into that.
And I was, luckily our executive, or my boss basically was like, let's look at some of the job announcements and, we'll help you out. Like, we can do a recommendation. So I'm like, all right, well, at least I've got a foot in the door. And I'd looked and saw that there was a temporary position as the program coordinator for veteran and military student services. I'm like, all right. So I asked about it, and they said, well, it's temporary. We didn't know if you'd want it. And I'm like, it's working with veterans. Of course I want it. And it was a half-funded position, half grant, half College of Charleston. And my first day, they gave me a copy of the grant, sent me to my office, and I thought, okay, what do I do? And they're like, just make a program. I'm like, all right, cool. And all I based it off of is what would I have liked to have. And I think one day I had a student in my office who was just having an awful time financially and was really embarrassed about it, and was talking about finding a part-time job. And I thought about it. I'm like, maybe some of these awful experiences will be helpful now to someone else, so they don't feel like, like you're losing, because you're not. And I shared with him, hey, I just spent 15 months unemployed. I know what it's like. I've had to sell blood to buy food for myself. I'm like, I get it. You're not a loser. This happens. And it happens to a lot of people. Unfortunately for me, I was one of those people, and it happens to people all the time. It's just knowing when to ask for help and not being embarrassed.
Right.
And he came back more just to chat. But what I wanted him and anyone else that comes into my office that has a problem to understand, it's not just you.
Right.
I mean, you're not on your own. No one's going to look down on you for having, maybe bad thoughts or financial difficulties, or you just need to talk through something. I'm more than happy to do it, because I was there.
Right.
And I think all that awful stuff prepared me for what I do now.
Yeah.
And then this past year, the college, after the first year, it was kind of unknown whether or not our program would continue, because the school would have to fund everything, which in the grand scheme of things wasn't really all that much. But getting money for new positions at the time was not a good time, because the college was in a budget shortfall. So they put it up to the provost and the president at the time, and they said, we'll give them a 5-year contract, both Matt and I, as a package deal, because he was doing admissions, and it was our way of being able to find you guys before you started, so that we weren't working off of just financial information. And this year, after 3 years as a temporary employee, I finally got a permanent position, and my job title changed to Director of Veteran and Military Student Services. And this job, I don't know what I would have been done. I mean, I can't imagine being anywhere else and not working with vets. I think all that awful stuff led to this. So maybe that was my training beforehand with all these terrible things, so that when I get here, I'm like, all right, yes, I can relate to almost anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I've ran the gamut of unfortunate events, and then also seen a lot of good that I can help other people with, because when I was going through it, I didn't have anyone to talk to, really. I didn't know where to go for anything. Now, I mean, I see it and I'm like, why didn't I know that when I helped someone else? That would have been great. It's all here. It's just wasn't, not here at the college, but in Charleston in general. If no one tells you, you don't know. So I get to be here to tell people.
Fist pump. Fist pump. Jessica, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you sharing, much.
You made me cry.
Yeah.
You made me happy.
I appreciate you sharing so much, and I really think that if anybody gets a chance to see this, it's gonna make an impact on somebody. So that's all. I think that's all any of us are trying to do. So I appreciate you sharing so much of yourself, and I really think everything is going to be okay.
Living the dream.
Living the dream. That's right. Well, Jessica Wilkes at the College of Charleston, combat veteran, director of Student and Veterans Affairs.
Veteran and Military Student Services.
Jeez, I messed that up.
Hey, I made that up too. I made up the name of this office.
Yeah.
Because at first they just had veterans, and I said,
Yeah.
no, you need to add military because when we're active duty, we don't consider ourselves veterans.
Yeah.
So I would think, oh, that doesn't apply to me. So, a little backstory on the founding of our program.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I think you've come a long way, and I congratulate you on all your success. Obviously, there's been a lot of difficulty, a lot of trials along the way, but I really think that
How can you help other people if you haven't
Yeah.
experienced some sort of struggle yourself? I think it's
I
maybe
agree.
very sympathetic and
Right.
understanding.
Right, I agree, but I think you're in a good place now, and I congratulate you on making it this far, and wish you luck in the future. And I think you're going to do a really good job, and I think you're going to make a difference in a lot of people's lives more than you already have. So I think you've made a difference in a lot of people's
I
lives.
just want you guys to graduate. Just graduate. That's it. That's all I require. Everybody graduate.
Yeah, and you know what? And I think you've made a lot of good friends along the way, and I definitely feel blessed having known you. So I'm glad that we come to meet each other. I think it's made a difference in my life. So
I need someone else old like me around here. So it can be you and Matt are the oldest people here.
So on that note, we're not that old. On that note, this has been another episode of This Way Out. If you like this episode and you want to see future episodes, be sure to hit the little notification bell. You can find episodes like this at thiswoe-light.com on the website. I'll put it in the comments. Also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Once again, thank you, Jessica, for being on the show. This Way Out. I'm Miguel. God bless.